I have watched the film Hamnet for the first time. I watched it for the first time last night, and oh my gosh, wow, that film. I have never seen an adaptation of Shakespeare's life where actors are portraying the real characters that I liked better than this one. And I've seen the Kenneth Branagh and Judi Dench version, All Is True. And while I love Kenneth Branagh and I love Judi Dench, they're incredible. I am not so much in love with their portrayal of the characters as I am with the movie Hamnet. It was amazing. It was like my favorite images of Shakespeare that I had conjured up in my head from reading about his life and studying about his life literally stepped out of my brain and onto the screen, and there they are. I'm looking at the ones that I had dreamed up, and it was amazing. I just loved it so much. Now, of course, there are historical details that they took license with. And good on them for doing that. I mean, it's a work of art after all. And for Shakespeare's life, there are plenty of gaps in the record for things that you can have fun with and guess about and speculate on. And speculation is fun. So when you are producing something that's intended to be entertaining, that's to be expected. So I didn't mind those places at all, especially because it was so well done. Now, of course, if you haven't seen it already, it's streaming now. You can watch it without having to go to the theater, which is fabulous. So I highly recommend watching it, but bring your tissues. It is incredibly sad, but it's just really exciting. And honestly, when you watch it, you fall in love with Shakespeare all over again. One aspect of the film that I wanted to bring up for discussion here with you is this idea that Anne, called Agnes in the film, was considered in the community to be potentially a forest witch. There was that sort of suspicion cast over her in the film. And if you watch it and you got confused about why she was called Agnes instead of Anne and what all this forest witch business was actually about, or if it was even real, then keep watching because we're going to answer these two questions about the film Hamnet right now on That Shakespeare Life. So first, let's unpack the name issue. We've got Agnes, spelled Agnes. It's not pronounced Agnes in the film, and all the records we've heard about Shakespeare's wife call her Anne. What in the world is going on here? Well, okay, just take a breath. So in the Tudor period, first of all, let's go ahead and say the movie did not get this wrong. This part was correct, and let me explain. Anne Hathaway, William Shakespeare's wife, is sometimes called Agnes, and you will actually hear people sometimes call her Agnes. I don't think that's correct, but there's a legal document that survives to the present day, which is the will that her father wrote when he died. And in this will, in 1581, is when her father died, he lists his daughter as Agnes, Agnes. Her father, being unlikely to get the name of his daughter wrong, has led some historians to say, well, her name is actually Agnes and it's not Anne. And so there's a whole school of thought over here that says Agnes is right. And then there's a school of thought over here that says, no, her name is Anne. And, they at each other. And I would like to throw out there some perspective that could make these two sides be friends. You see, in William Shakespeare's lifetime, there was no correct way to spell anything. Anything. I have an entire podcast episode for you that goes into the history of why that is a true statement, but there weren't things like spelling dictionaries. There wasn't a right way to spell this or to spell that. Language was very, very fluid, and people wrote the way that things sounded. There were obviously generally accepted spellings for some things, but especially about names, there wasn't a right or a wrong. And parents didn't give this excruciating effort into how to spell a name. And so when we look at the will and we think, oh, well, her father spelled it this way, that must be what it really is. I really don't think her father would have thought about it that way. They would have named her Anne, and he could have spelled it Agnes or Anne. And I think it's possible the same person could have written about his daughter in multiple places with multiple spellings. We see that throughout the period. That just happened. While the Hamnet movie goes out of its way to make Agnes have this strong pronunciation on the ñ without going so far as to call her Agnes, because that would be different. The point I think the film is making, and that I'm trying to share with you now, is that there was a really strong relationship between Agnes and Anne, where they could almost be interchangeable in terms of how they sounded. And so when you're looking at how they're written down, it could be the same person and have two different spellings. That would not be a weird thing in this time period. As a side note here, there are some other fun historical tidbits I responded to in the film that I wanted to mention at this juncture. The first was that when they are when you meet Anne and you see or on yes and you see her family, you notice that she has a stepmother, and that's an accurate historical fact, which I thought was cool that they put in there. Her mother the stepmother was actually her Richard Hathaway's second wife. Anne's mother was probably his first wife, and so Anne was the product of their first marriage. However, they would have been unlikely to have been as upset about Anne being in a relationship with William Shakespeare as the film portrays. Now, I'll explain that too. Now, William, at the time he is getting married to Anne, isn't a very flashy marriage prospect. He's not a high-ranking citizen, but I do think that the Hathaways and Shakespeares were probably friends. Stratford upon Avon just wasn't huge, so if you lived there, you probably knew most everybody else. So even if they weren't like besties, they knew each other, one family and the other. And I think the marriage really would have been beneficial to both sides. Anne was older, and the film tries to make that about her being a forest witch, and so like that she was a little weird girl and people didn't want to marry her. We'll come back to that in just a minute, but I think the fact that she was older when William shows up going, "Hey, I want to marry her." Her family was probably cool with that because she didn't have a whole lot of prospects. Especially her father dies 1 year before they get married. So he dies, and then a year later, they get married. So she was in real need of that stability, which was essential for women in this time period. So I really think her family would have been cool with it. And honestly, at that juncture in their lives, the Hathaways were better off than the Shakespeares. So it would have been a beneficial arrangement for William as well because of that. So I don't think his family would have had a problem with it either. To go even one step further, the whole concept of a shotgun wedding and being upset that she was pregnant when they were walking down the aisle, that's totally a modern perspective. In Shakespeare's lifetime, there are a lot of records of women who are several months along when they are getting married. To be handfasted to someone and then get pregnant before you actually had the official marriage ceremony was extremely common. Now, I think the preference is that you would get pregnant after the official marriage ceremony, but I don't think anybody would have been quite as up in arms about it as the movie tries to make that sound. And I don't think that their marriage was about getting married quickly because she was pregnant. It certainly wasn't something motivated by her father because he wasn't there. So that I don't think that interpretation of the whole they had to get married because she was pregnant. I'm not sure how much that played into the situation, but going down that rabbit trail any further is for later. I did want to circle back to the forest witch comment. Okay, so first of all, a forest witch is not actually a term that I've ever heard. I'm not a witch historian, so maybe that exists as a distinction in this time period, but I get the impression that a witch was a witch, and there wasn't really like a good witch, bad witch, this kind of witch, that kind of witch. You either were or you weren't, and being one was bad. And further, I've never heard this perspective applied to Anne Hathaway in particular. The witch thing in this film seems to have been invented for the movie, and I think they handle it well. I mean, they keep it in the realm of plausible in terms of you're watching it going, huh, that could have been a thing. But as far as whether it's historical, I don't think we have any historical evidence to suggest that people thought that she was a witch or that that played into why she wasn't married by age 26. I do think they use that trope in the movie expertly. It works very, very well. But it's important to know that all of that is actually speculative. At least that part of it is speculative. There is historical basis for throwing it in there, but they're throwing it into their story. Now, throwing around the historical accuracy of witches in the period plays into this story more directly, though, because the poem that Anne is reciting, the one that she was taught by her mother and then recites with her brother and just forms this thread throughout her life, that is a real poem. It is historical. It is called The Nine Herbs Charm. It's an Old English poem. I think it dates from the 10th or maybe 11th century, but it's really old. And the poem personifies different herbs that are believed to have protective qualities, specifically against ailments like the bubonic plague. And that's where it hits the Shakespeare's really personally. The bubonic plague would have waves of outbreaks throughout the 15, I know the 1560s, but possibly earlier than that too. But it would, when it would arrive, it would come in these waves, and there would be like years of massive death, and then it would like die off, and then it would come back, and you'd have more death, and it would die off, so it would go like this. In 1566 is when Anne Hathaway's mother died. We don't know for sure what she died of, but there was a plague outbreak that year, so it's likely to think that she died of plague. Later, Hamnet dies of plague in 1596. Don't freak out. You should know that going into the film. That is the major sad part, but as my French professor told me, it's about the journey, not the destination. Knowing that the boat sank didn't ruin Titanic for you. Knowing that Hamnet dies won't ruin this film for you either. But the connecting thread to the Nine Herbs charm is the fact that that charm didn't protect her mother, and then it goes on to not protect Hamnet, and it was portrayed in the film as such a core part of her identity. That's a major plot point. I won't chase that down any further for you because you need to watch the film. Oh, interesting thought. Anne's mom did die when she was 10. And for perspective on the age gap there, William Shakespeare was 2 that year. Maybe even closer to 1.5, because I think she died in November of 1566 and he was born in April of 1564. So he was like 1.5, 2 years old. So anyway, the poem's use, though, the fact that herbs were and plants played an integral role in the daily lives of ordinary people at all strata of society during Shakespeare's lifetime, completely historically accurate. So the fact that it would have been a core identity for Anne, that's completely plausible. And I love the way that this film plays that plausible line. You know, it's not like it just takes creative license by going way over here and grabbing something crazy and saying, I'm going to plant this in the film. It uses creativity in a way that is completely backed by history. And I love it. I think it's fantastic. And so that's basically that story. And I won't give you any more details, but yes, I was thrilled to know that Jessie Buckley, who played Anne in this film, won an Oscar for her role in this film. As well, she should have. It was fantastic. I would have liked to have seen Paul Mescal, who plays William Shakespeare, get an Oscar for his role. I don't actually know if he was even nominated. I didn't watch the Oscars this year. I just read about Jessie Buckley's later. My reasons why is probably for later, but I thought Paul Mescal did a great job. He was a fantastic Shakespeare. Oh my gosh, it was so cool. So anyway, huge nod to him and congrats. But what about you? Have you seen the film? Do you like the film? Please go watch it. Tell me your favorite part and then just report back, okay? What did you think about the portrayal of William? What do you think about Anne? Do you think they did her justice? And then tell me what you think about the Anne versus Agnes thing. I think once you watch the film, it won't bother you, but I don't know. Let me know in the comments. But that's it for this week. Thank you for watching. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. If you like walking around and turn at the 17th century England to see the sights, smell the smells, play the games, and maybe even haunt an old theater or two, then this is the place for you. Hit that notification bell so you can be sure to join us on our next adventure. I'll see you in the next episode.